right, howdy class. Today we are starting Unit 3, Solving Multi-Step Equations and Inequalities. And today we are starting with 3-1, Solving Inequality or Equations with variables on each side. So your learning intentions today is to do exactly that, solve equations with variables on each side. And you're going to know you have it, that success criteria is when you can use inverse operations to find the value of a variable, x, y, whatever that variable happens to be. Let's take a look at our notes and figure out how to do that. All right, so once again, we are going to solve for a variable. This is a little review. This is only a variable on one side, so this is a little practice, a little warm-up before we get into this lesson. So when we are solving for x, you have to get it by itself, and to do that, you would just use inverse operations. So the only operation here with x is adding 4. The inverse or opposite of that would be subtracting 4. So subtract 4 from both sides, and our 4's will cancel. Then we are left with x equals 12 minus 4, which is 8, and that would be our answer. So let's see how we can apply this to this new unit. All right, if you do not have this in your notes, I highly suggest you put this in your notes. All right, this is a table of all of the inverse operations we will use in this class all year. This is also the same list that is on the board in class, but I highly suggest you put it in your notes as well. And what we see here is that addition is the opposite of subtraction, multiplication is the opposite of division, square root is the opposite of squaring, and cube root is the opposite of cubing. All right, these are all of our inverse operations. All right. So here comes the first example, first introduction to Unit 3, where we have variables on both sides. Now, the nice thing is we still use inverse operations that you just saw. The only difference is now we are going to use them to combine like terms, which means terms with the same variable. So 6n and 4n both have the variable n. 8 and -9 both have no variable, so those are like terms as well. So now let's use inverse operations to combine these like terms. The opposite of 4n is -4n, so just subtract 4n from both sides of your equation. Your 4n's will cancel. 6n minus 4n is 2n. Bring down the rest of the equation we haven't touched yet. Plus 8 equals -9. Now, once again, we have to get n by itself, so we got to use inverse operations. The opposite of adding 8 is subtracting 8 from both sides. And I wrote 9 for some reason. Let me write that. Let me fix that. So that's an 8. So our 8's cancel. We are left with 2n equals -17. All right, last step. 2 times n. The inverse of multiply is divide. So -17 divided by 2. We should be left with n equals 8.5. All right, so that's our answer. Box it in. Don't let me forget that. I don't want you guys to forget that. Ooh, that's good enough. All right, so that is your answer. The next couple of slides are going to show the same work we just did, except it's going to be nice and neat so you can actually see what happened. So this is the step where we combined our n's, right? Like I said, the opposite of 4n is -4n. And that should lead us to 2n plus 8 equals -9. All right, so after we added 4n to, or subtracted 4n from each side, we are left with 2n plus 8 equals -9. Like I said, inverse of adding is subtraction. So the second step would be to subtract that 8 from both sides, leaving us with 2n minus 17. Now that final step was to divide both sides by 2, because 2 times n, the opposite of multiply is divide, so we divide by 2. Our 2's go to 1, leaving us with n equals -8.5. I think when I did the work originally, I missed the negative sign, which is a good lesson. Don't lose your signs. Mr. Malloy would have gotten that problem wrong. So please make sure you keep your signs when you're doing your work. You don't want to end up doing what I just did and getting the problem wrong. So here's another example that I'm going to walk you through but I want you to try the next one, the check problem, on your own. So here we have 6n minus 1 equals 4n minus 5. Just like in the last one, you're going to want to combine your like terms using inverse operations, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to take my 4 and combine that with my 6 because I like my numbers to stay positive as much as I can. So those cancel. 6 minus 4 is 2, so we are back at 2n minus 1 equals negative 5. I'm going to keep track of my negative sign this time. So the opposite of subtraction 1 is adding 1. Once again, cancels. We are left with 2n equals negative 5 plus 4, or plus 1, is negative 4. The opposite of multiply is divide. We're almost home. We are going to equal n equals negative 2 or negative 4 divided by 2, which is negative 2. Box in your answer. All right, once again, I'm going to walk you through this with the slides so you can see what happened nice and neat and get it in your notes. So again, this first step, all we did was subtract 4n from both sides. And that led us to 2n minus 1 equals negative 5. From here, we just simply get rid of the negative 1 or minus 1 by adding 1 to both sides. And that gives us 2n equals negative 4. All right, and the last step was to divide both sides by 2. And that would give us n equals negative 2. Now you're going to do the exact same thing on your own for this check problem. The answer will be on the next slide, but pause it here and try to solve on your own. So if you did all of your steps correctly for the check problem, you should have x equals 3 as your answer. If you did not get x equals 3, go through your work, see if you can identify any errors, or at the very least, come in and let us help you ask some questions in class. So the last thing we need to go over is sometimes you may see fractions, and we need to talk about what you might need to do to those fractions before you can work with them. So if we were to combine like terms, we would be adding 1/6 x to each side. But you can't add fractions unless they have the same denominator. So the trick to these fraction problems is you have to make sure all of your fractions have the same denominator, and if not, you have to make sure you can change them so that they do. So this one's actually kind of easy because you would just multiply this whole fraction by 2, right? Because 2 times 2 is 4, but more importantly, 3 times 2 is 6. So now you have the same denominator. 2/3 is the same as 4/6. Now we can do the math. 4/6 plus 1/6 is 5/6. X minus 1 equals 9. Now, once again, inverse operations. You're going to add 1 to both sides. You are 5/6 x equals 10. Now, here comes the other trick. This is multiplication, and the opposite of multiplying is to divide. But when you divide by a fraction, you really need to remember that you are multiplying by the reciprocal. Flip it. So instead of 5/6, you're dividing by 5/6, you're going to multiply by 6/5. And this will give you x. So x will equal 10 times 6 is 60, divided by 5 should give you 12. If my pen will work. All right, you know what? Let's just try to write it under here. 12. So x equals 12. And that's kind of messy. Let's take a look at the next couple of slides. It'll be nice and neat for you. So once again, here, the difference between the first step, and the second step is we have changed the fraction. That's it. That's literally the only thing we did on the first step. And to do that, like I said, we had to multiply the numerator and denominator by 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. Once your denominators are the same, you can proceed and add and subtract without any issues. So step 2 and step 3. The only difference now is here is where we moved our 1/6x, right? The inverse of subtracting 1/6x is adding 1/6x. So we did that to both sides. And you should have 5/6x minus 1 equals 9. So the difference between step 3 and step 4 is, once again, we just did inverse operations. We added 1. And, these ones cancel. 9 plus 1 is 10, and you should be right here with step 4. Now, finally, when we have to divide by 5/6, right? The cancel here. You do not want to divide 10 by 5/6. You want to multiply by the reciprocal. It's the same thing, it's just a little easier to math out in your head. And here you would just do 10 times 6 is 60 over 5. 60 divided by 5 is 12, and that should be your answer, x equals 12. All right, try to do the same thing for your check problem. I know it's kind of a difficult problem, but if you can get this, you guys will be set for 3-1. Once again, pause it. The correct answer is on the next slide. That should be the last thing in the video. Once you're done with that, you're good to go. Notes are over. Have a good one. Just kidding. I actually want you to look at your answer. So here it is. If you didn't try this on your own, please do. It's kind of important to work problems on your own. It's the only way you're going to learn. Take it easy.